Today we're going to show you how to change the snubber ring on your washer. And it's a really easy job. All you're going to need is a putty knife, a 5/16 and a 1/4 inch nut driver, a 3/8 socket and a ratchet, a small flat blade screwdriver, a pair of locking pliers, and a pair of slip joint pliers. Let me show you how we do it. Now the first step of this repair will be to lift the main top and then remove the front panel. There's a couple of spring clips that are in about 4 inches from either side that we need to release to lift the main top. So the thin putty knife will come in from the center till we feel an obstruction, and then depress the spring with the putty knife. Then carefully lift the top, and we'll want to position the washer so that we can either lean the main top against the wall or have somebody support it while we're doing the repair. Next, we're going to remove two 5/16 hex head screws that secure the top of the front panel to the cabinet. Now we'll tilt the front panel away at the top, and then we'll disengage a couple of hooks that are attached to the base frame, and then we can remove the front panel and set it aside. Now with the front panel removed, we now have access to the 4 springs in the front. Now to get at the one on the right hand side, we will need to remove the motor, so we'll begin with that. It's held in place with 2 3/8 bolts that secure it to the base frame, and then we'll also need to remove the ground wire so that we can pull it out far enough and disconnect the main wire harness. Next, we're going to remove the 3/8 bolt at the front, and then we're going to rotate that motor forward. If you can't get the motor forward enough to access that rear bolt, you may need to tilt the washer at this point and roll the drive belt off of the motor pulley. Then we're just going to reach in behind, and we're going to locate that 3/8 bolt. It's identical to the one on the front. Just pull that bolt out and set that aside. Now with the ground wire and the 2 bolts from the motor base frame removed, we can lift that motor up out of the base. And if you can't get it free of the drive belt, you will need to tilt the washer up enough that you can roll it off of the pulley. And we'll just pull that out far enough that we don't stretch the wire harness, and set it aside, and that will give us access to that spring on the right hand side. Now because there are some sharp edges in here and those springs have a little bit of tension on them, we will put some protective gloves on. Now when we go to remove these springs, you'll notice that there are 3 of them that are attached to the support legs of that tub support, and then there are 3 that are in between that hook to a hanger that hangs from that support. Now, as we remove each spring, we will want to tilt that tub towards the spring to reduce some of the tension on it. And we'll take our locking pliers, just grasp the shaft of that spring, make sure you have a good grip on them, and then we're just going to stretch that spring enough to disconnect at the top, and we'll rotate the spring out of the base frame, and we'll discard the old spring. We'll just work our way around. Now to gain access to the rear springs, we will need to remove the rear access panel. And we find it easier just to pull the machine completely away from the wall, disconnect the fill hoses and the drain hose. Just makes it a little easier to work on. The back panel is held in place with 5/16 hex head screws. We're going to remove 3 across the top and the 2 on the ends, and then we'll just loosen the 3 on the bottom. We'll set that panel aside, and again we'll put our protective gloves on, and we're going to pull that tub towards the back, and then with our locking pliers we'll grasp that spring firmly, and then we'll lift it free of the hook. Tilt it out of the base frame. Now with the motor removed and all of the springs disconnected, we next need to disconnect the tub to pump hose. And it's easier to do that from the pump. If you can reach it from the front side, Just squeeze that clamp and pull it up, and then disconnect the hose. If you can't access it from the front, just remove the 5/16 screws on the small access panel on the back and access it from that area. Now, there will be some water that will come out, so I have a towel ready to clean that up. And now we're ready to disconnect the air bell hose. Simply tilt the tub forward enough that we can reach down in behind and depress the little spring clamp that holds that hose to the bell on the side of the outer tub. Now we can lift the whole tub assembly, and you may need two people to do this, but simply lift it straight up out of the base opening, being careful not to damage the pulley, and tilt it forward on the bottom and pull the whole assembly out. Then we're going to turn the whole tub and suspension assembly upside down, and this way we can access the snubber ring. Now, to remove the snubber ring, what we need to do is to remove the bottom of the brake, and it's held in place with 6 screws, and there is a spring that's inside of that brake that has about 200 pounds of pressure on it, so we have to be very careful when we remove that brake cover. So what I suggest you take is some 1-inch long number 10 by 24 thread screws. Take 3 of those and then remove 3 of the existing screws. They're only about 3/4 of an inch long. So we'll take one out and skip one, take the next one out, and so on, so that we have 3 of them removed in a triangular pattern. And then we'll replace those short screws with the 1-inch long ones. We'll just put them in about 3/8 of an inch into the threaded portion. Now, with those 3 longer screws in place, we can remove the remaining 3 original screws and just turn them a few turns each in succession so that we have even pressure on that brake spring. And then we can just carefully unthread those remaining 3 shorter screws. And at this point, we can slide the snubber out from underneath that brake drum and remove it. Now, before we install the new snubber assembly, we want to make sure that the bottom suspension mount is clean and dry. And then we're just going to fit the upper edge of that snubber in underneath the brake. You may just need to lift up slightly on that brake, fit it underneath, and make sure it's even all the way around. And before we tighten those screws, make sure that all 3 holes that are lined up perfectly. Now, alternately tighten each of the screws, making sure that the snubber is staying in place and that it's even all the way around, and then tighten the screws securely. We can now remove the longer ones and replace them with the originals. Now, tighten the last 3 screws securely. And then before we put the assembly back in, we will need to examine the base of the washer and clean up any of the debris from the old snubber ring and make sure that it's free of any lubricants. There shouldn't be any grease or oil in that area. It's a dry snubber on this style of washer. The only thing that you might lubricate it with would be some cornstarch. So we'll clean up that area first. Just wipe the remaining residue from that area and inspect that dome to make sure that it is free of any lubricants, and then we can put the tub back in. So when reinstalling this tub, we want to make sure that we don't damage that pulley when we set it down. So carefully balance it on the pulley, rotate it around so we have the tub to pump hose in the right position. And we're going to tilt the top of the tub in first. So we get in underneath that cross member. Carefully set it down into place. We'll reinstall that air bell tube. Just squeeze the clamp Make sure it's fully inserted over the air bell. Next, we can reinstall the tub to pump hose. And again, if you can access it from the front, or you can also access it from the back. And next, we'll reinstall these suspension springs. Make sure that they all fit up through the holes in the base frame. And use caution when reinstalling them that we don't overstretch the springs. So with our locking pliers, we'll begin by putting the two side ones in, then work our way around the tub. Now at this point we can put the motor back into position. Just carefully lift it up and set the pulley down through the hole. And then install the bolt on the front. We won't tighten this bolt completely, and we'll rotate the motor forward and then locate the hole on the back side. And you'll probably have to pivot that motor base frame until you find the nut on the frame, and then we can tighten that bolt. And rotate the motor back into position. Tighten the front bolt securely, and then rotate the ground wire into position. And we'll install the machine screw to the motor base frame first, and then with the self-tapping screw, we'll secure the ground wire to the washer base. And now we can turn the machine around and access the back of it to replace the two remaining springs at the very back. And just stretch the spring enough to catch that hook, and do the same for the last one. Now we can reinstall the back panel. Make sure that we engage all three slots on the bottom of that panel. Now we're ready to reconnect the drain hose and the fill hose and put the washer back into position. Now to reinstall the front panel, we want to make sure that we engage those slotted holes on the bottom of the front panel with the clips that are attached to the base frame. We also have a couple of locating pins, one on each side, that will have a nylon insert that slides over those. Make sure those are both in position before we install the panel. And then as you raise the panel into position, make sure that those pins line up with the appropriate hole, and then hold it in position. And we'll start the 5/16 screws to secure it. And make sure both of those screws are tight. And also check there is two locating pins on the top of that front panel that will engage two holes in the main top. There's also a rubber gasket that fits down over those pins. Make sure those are both in position. And carefully lower the main top. Line up those pins and then press the top into position so that the spring clips catch. We're ready to reconnect the power, and our repair is complete.